Part 1 of The Stainless Steel Rat. Recording by Phil Chenevert, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Stainless Steel Rat by Harry Harrison. This story was first published in Astounding Science Fiction, August 1957. Part 1. When the office door opened suddenly, I knew the game was up. It had been a moneymaker, but it was all over. As the cop walked in, I sat back in the chair and put on a happy grin. He had the same somber expression and heavy foot that they all have, and the same lack of humor. I almost knew to the word what he was going to say before he uttered a syllable. "James Bolivar deGriz, I arrest you on the charge." I was waiting for the word charge. I thought it made a nice touch that way. As he said it, I pressed the button that set off the charge of black powder in the ceiling. The crossbeam buckled and the 3-ton safe dropped through right on the top of the cop's head. He squashed very nicely, thank you. The cloud of plaster dust settled, and all I could see of him was one hand, slightly crumpled. It twitched a bit, and the index finger pointed at me accusingly. His voice was a little muffled by the safe, and sounded a bit annoyed. In fact, he repeated himself a bit. "On the charge of illegal entry, theft, forgery." He ran on like that for quite a while. It was an impressive list, but I had heard it all before. I didn't let it interfere with my stuffing all the money from the desk drawers into my suitcase. The list ended with a new charge, and I would swear on a stack of 1,000-credit notes that high that there was a hurt tone in his voice. "In addition, the charge of assaulting a police robot will be added to your record. This was foolish, since my brain and larynx are armored and in my midsection." "That I knew well, George, but your little two-way radio is in the top of your pointed head, and I don't want you reporting to your friends just yet." One good kick knocked the escape panel out of the wall and gave access to the step to the basement. As I skirted the rubble on the floor, the robot's fingers snapped out at my leg, but I had been waiting for this, and they closed about 2 inches short. I have been followed by enough police robots to know by now how indestructible they are. You can blow them up or knock them down, and they keep coming after you, dragging themselves by one good finger and spouting saccharine morality all the while. That's what this one was doing. Give up my life of crime and pay my debt to society and such. I could still hear his voice echoing down the stairwell as I reached the basement. Every second was timed now. I had about 3 minutes before they would be on my tail, and it would take me exactly 1 minute and 8 seconds to get clear of the building. That wasn't much of a lead, and I would need all of it. Another kick panel opened out into the label removing room. None of the robots looked up as I moved down the aisle. I would have been surprised if they had. They were all low-grade M-types, short on brains and good only for simple, repetitive work. That was why I hired them. They had no curiosity as to why they were taking the labels off the filled cans of azote fruits, or what was at the other end of the moving belt that brought the cans through the wall. They didn't even look up when I unlocked the door that was never unlocked, that led through the wall. I left it open behind me, as I had no more secrets now. Keeping next to the rumbling belt, I stepped through the jagged hole I had chopped in the wall of the government warehouse. I had installed the belt, too. This and the hole were the illegal acts that I had to do myself. Another locked door opened into the warehouse itself. The automatic forklift truck was busily piling cans onto the belt and digging fresh ones out of the ceiling-high piles. The forklift had barely enough brains to be called a robot. It just followed tape directions to load the cans. I stepped around it and dog-trotted down the aisle. Behind me, the sounds of my illegal activity died away. It gave me a warm feeling to still hear it going full blast like that. It had been one of the nicest little rackets I had ever managed. For a small capital outlay, I had rented the warehouse that backed on the government warehouse. A simple hole in the wall and I had access to the entire stock of stored goods, long-term supplies that I knew would be untouched for months or years in a warehouse this size. Untouched, that is, until I came along. After the hole had been made and the belt installed, it was just a matter of business. I hired the robots to remove the old labels and substitute the colorful ones I had printed. Then I marketed my goods in a strictly legal fashion. My stock was the best, and due to my imaginative operation, my costs were very low. I could afford to undersell my competitors and still make a handsome profit. The local wholesalers had been quick to sense a bargain, and I had orders from months ahead. It had been a good operation, and could have gone on for quite a while. I stifled that train of thought before it started. One lesson that has to be remembered in my line of business is that when an operation is over, it is over. The temptation to stay just one more day or to cash just one more check can be almost overwhelming. Ah, how well I know. I also know that it is also the best way to get better acquainted with the police. Turn your back and walk away and live to graft another day. That's my motto, and it's a good one. I got where I am because I stuck to it, and daydreams aren't part of getting away from the police. I pushed all thoughts from my mind as I reached the end of the aisle. The entire area outside must have been swarming with cops by this time, and I had to move fast and make no mistakes. A fast look right and left. Nobody in sight. 2 steps ahead and press the elevator button. I had put a meter on this back elevator, and it showed that the thing was used once a month on the average. It arrived in about 3 seconds, empty, and I jumped in, thumbing the roof button at the same time. The ride seemed to go on forever, but that was just subjective. By the record, it was exactly 14 seconds. This was the most dangerous part of the trip. I tightened up as the elevator slowed. My .75 caliber recoilless was in my hand. That would take care of one cop, but no more. The door shuffled open, and I relaxed. Nothing. They must have the entire area covered on the ground, so they hadn't bothered to put cops on the roof. In the open air now, I could hear the sirens for the first time. A wonderful sound. They must have had half of the entire police force out from the amount of noise they were making. I accepted it as any artist accepts tribute. The board was behind the elevator shaft where I had left it, a little weather-stained but still strong. A few seconds to carry it to the edge of the parapet and reach it along to the next building. Gently, this was the one dangerous spot where speed didn't count. Carefully onto the end of the board, the suitcase held against my chest to keep my center of gravity over the board. One step at a time, a 1,000-foot drop to the ground. If you don't look down, you can't fall. Over. Time for speed. The board behind the parapet. If they didn't see it at first, my trail would be covered for a while at least. 10 fast steps, and there was the door to the stairwell. It opened easily, and it better have. I had put enough oil on the hinges. Once inside, I threw the bolt and took a long, deep breath. I wasn't out of it yet, but the worst part, where I ran the most risk, was past. 2 uninterrupted minutes here, and they would never find James Bolivar, alias Slippery Jim deGriz. The stairwell at the roof was a musty, badly lit cubicle that was never visited. I had checked it carefully a week before for phono and optic bugs, and it had been clear. The dust looked undisturbed, except for my own footprints. I had to take a chance that it hadn't been bugs since then. The calculated risk must be accepted in this business. Goodbye, James deGriz. Weight 98 kilos, age about 45, thick in the middle and heavy in the jowls. A typical businessman whose picture graces the police files of 1,000 planets. Also, his fingerprints. They went first. When you wear them, they feel like a second skin. A touch of solvent, though, and they peel off like a pair of transparent gloves. all my clothes next, and then the girdle in reverse, that lovely paunch that straps around my belly and holds 20 kilos of lead mixed with thermite. A quick wipe from the bottle of bleach, and my hair was its natural shade of brown, the eyebrows too. The nose plugs and the cheek pads hurt coming out, but that only lasts a second. Then the blue-eyed contact lenses. This process leaves me mother naked, and I always feel as if I have been born again. In a sense, it is true. I have become a new man, 20 kilos lighter, 10 years younger, and with a completely different description. The large suitcase held a complete change of clothes and a pair of dark-rimmed glasses that replaced the contact lenses. All the loose money fitted neatly into a briefcase. When I straightened up, I really felt as if 10 years had been stripped from me. I was so used to wearing that weight that I never noticed it until it was gone. Put a real spring in my step. The thermite would take care of all the evidence. I kicked it all into a heap and triggered the fuse. It caught with a roar, and bottles, clothes, bags, shoes, weights, and all burned with a cheerful glare. The police would find a charred spot on the cement, and micro-analysis might get them a few molecules off the walls, but that was all they would get. The glare of the burning thermite threw jumping shadows around me as I walked down 3 flights to the 112th floor. Luck was still with me. There was no one on the floor when I opened the door. 1 minute later, the express elevator let me and a handful of other business types out into the lobby. Only one door was open to the street, and a portable TV camera was trained on it. No attempt had been made to stop people from going in and out of the building. Most of them didn't even notice the camera and the little group of cops around it. I walked towards it at an even pace. Strong nerves count for a lot in this business. For one instant I was square in the field of that cold glass eye. Then I was past. Nothing happened, so I knew I was clear. That camera must have fed direct to the main computer at police headquarters. If my description had been close enough to the one they had on file, those robots would have been notified, and I would have been pinned before I had taken a step. You can't outmove a computer-robot combination, not when they move and think in microseconds, but you can outthink them. I had done it again. A cab took me about 10 blocks away. I waited until it was out of sight, then took another one. It wasn't until I was in the 3rd cab that I felt safe enough to go to the space terminal. The sounds of sirens were growing fainter and fainter behind me, and only an occasional police car tore by in the opposite direction. They were sure making a big fuss over a little larceny, but that's the way it goes on these over-civilized worlds. Crime is such a rarity now that the police really get carried away when they run across some. In a way, I can't blame them. Giving out traffic tickets must be an awful dull job. I really believe they ought to thank me for putting a little excitement in their otherwise dull lives. It was a nice ride to the spaceport, being located, of course, far out of town. I had time to lean back and watch the scenery and gather my thoughts. Even time to be a little philosophical. For one thing, I could enjoy a good cigar again. I smoked only cigarettes in my other personality, and never violated that personality even in strictest privacy. The cigars were still fresh in the pocket humidor where I had put them 6 months ago. I sucked a long mouthful and blew the smoke out at the flashing scenery. It was good to be off the job, just about as good as being on it. I can never make my mind up which period I enjoyed more. I guess they are both right at the time. My life is so different from that of the overwhelming majority of people in our society that I doubt if I could even explain it to them. They exist in a fat, rich union of worlds that have almost forgotten the meaning of the word crime. There are few malcontents, and even fewer that are socially maladjusted. The few that are still born, in spite of centuries of genetic control, are caught early, and the aberration quickly adjusted. Some don't show their weakness until they are adults. They are the ones who try their hand at petty crime, burglary, shoplifting, and such. They get away with it for a week or two or a month or two, depending on the degree of their native intelligence. But sure as atomic decay, and just as predestined, the police reach out and pull them in. That is almost the full extent of crime in our organized, dandified society. 99% of it, let's say. It is that last and vital 1% that keeps the police departments in business. That 1% is me and a few others like me, a handful of men scattered around the galaxy. Theoretically, we can't exist, and if we do exist, we can't operate. But we do. We are the rats in the wainscoting of society. We operate outside of their barriers and outside of their rules. Society had more rats when the rules were looser, just as the old wooden buildings had more rats than the concrete buildings that came later. But they still had rats. Now that society is all ferro-concrete and stainless steel, there are fewer gaps between the joints, and it takes a smart rat to find them. A stainless steel rat is right at home in this environment. It is a proud and lonely thing to be a stainless steel rat, and it is the greatest experience in the galaxy if you can get away with it. The sociological experts can't seem to agree why we exist. Some even doubt that we do. The most widely accepted theory says that we are victims of delayed psychological disturbance that shows no evidence in childhood when it can be detected and corrected, and only appears later in life. I have naturally given a lot of thought to the topic, and I don't hold with that idea at all. A few years back, I wrote a small book on the subject, under a nom de plume, of course, that was rather well received. My theory is that the aberration is a philosophical one, not a psychological one. At a certain stage, the realization strikes through that one must either live outside of society's bonds or die of absolute boredom. There is no future or freedom in the circumscribed life, and the only other life is complete rejection of the rules. There is no longer room for the soldiers of fortune or the gentlemen of adventure who can live both within and outside of society. Today, it is all or nothing. To save my own sanity, I choose the nothing. The cab just reached the spaceport as I hit this negative line of thought, and I was glad to abandon it. Loneliness is the thing to fear in this business. That and self-pity can destroy you if they get the upper hand. Action has always helped me. The elation of danger and escape always clears my mind. When I paid the cab, I short-changed the driver right under his nose, palming one of the credit notes in the act of handing it to him. He was blind as a riveted bulkhead. His gullibility had me humming with delight. The tip I gave him more than made up the loss, since I only do this sort of petty business to break the monotony. There was a robot clerk behind the ticket window. He had that extra third eye in the center of his forehead that meant a camera. It clicked slightly as I purchased a ticket, recording my face and destination. A normal precaution on the part of the police. I would have been surprised if it hadn't happened. My destination was inter-system, so I doubted if the picture would appear any place except in the files. I wasn't making an interstellar hop this time, as I usually did after a big job. It wasn't necessary. After a job, a single world or a small system is too small for more work. But Beta Cygnus had a system of almost 20 planets, all with terrified weather. This planet, 3, was too hot now, but the rest of the system was wide open. There was a lot of commercial rivalry within the system, and I knew their police departments didn't cooperate too well. They would pay the price for that. My ticket was for Maury, number 18, a large and mostly agricultural planet. There were a number of little stores at the spaceport. I shopped them carefully and outfitted a new suitcase with a complete wardrobe and traveling essentials. The tailor was saved for last. He ran up a couple of traveling suits and a formal kilt for me, and I took them into the fitting booth. Strictly by accident, I managed to hang one of the suits over the optic bug in the wall. and made undressing sounds with my feet while I doctored the ticket I had just bought. The other end of my cigar cutter was a punch. With it I altered the keyed holes that indicated my destination. I was now going to planet 10, not 18, and I had lost almost 200 credits with the alteration. That's the secret of ticket and order changing. Don't raise the face value. There is too good a chance that this will be noticed. If you lower the value and lose money on the deal, even if it is caught, people will be sure it is a mistake on the machine's part. There is never the shadow of a doubt, since why would anyone change a ticket to lose money? Before the police could be suspicious, I had the suit off the bug and tried it on, taking my time. Almost everything was ready now. I had about an hour to kill before the ship left. I spent the time wisely by going to an automatic cleaner and having all my new clothes cleaned and pressed. Nothing interests a customs man more than a suitcase full of unworn clothes. Customs was a snap, and when the ship was about half full, I boarded her and took a seat near the hostess. I flirted with her until she walked away, having classified me in the category of male, brash, annoying. An old girl who had the seat next to mine also had me filed in the same drawer and was looking out of the window with obvious ice on her shoulder. I dozed off happily, since there is one thing better than not being noticed, and that is being noticed and filed into a category. Your description gets mixed up with every other guy in the file, and that is the end of it. When I woke up, we were almost to Planet 10. I had dozed in the chair until we touched down, then smoked a cigar while my bag cleared customs. My locked briefcase of money raised no suspicions, since I had foresightedly forged papers 6 months ago with my occupation listed as bank messenger. Interplanetary credit was almost non-existent in this system, so the custom men were used to seeing a lot of cash go back and forth. Almost by habit, I confused the trail a little more and ended up in the large manufacturing city of Brog, over 1,000 kilometers from the point where I had landed. Using an entirely new set of identification papers, I registered at a quiet hotel in the suburbs. Usually, after a big job like this, I rest up for a month or two. This was one time, though, I didn't feel like a rest. While I was making small purchases around town to rebuild the personality of James deGriz, I was also keeping my eyes open for new business opportunities. The very first day I was out, I saw what looked like a natural, and each day it looked better and better. One of the main reasons I have stayed out of the arms of the law for so long as I have is that I have never repeated myself. I have dreamed up some of the sweetest little rockets, run them off once, then stayed away from them forever after. About the only thing they had in common was the fact that they all made money. About the only thing I hadn't hit to date was out-and-out armed robbery. It was time for a change, and it looked like that was it. While I was rebuilding the paunchy personality of Slippery Jim, I was making plans for the operation. Just about the time the fingerprint gloves were ready, the entire business was planned. It was simple, like all good operations should be. The less details there are, the less things there are that can go wrong. I was going to hold up Moreo's, the largest retail store in the city. Every evening at exactly the same time, an armored car took the day's receipts to the bank. It was a tempting prize, a gigantic sum in untraceable small bills. The only real problem as far as I was concerned was how one man could handle the sheer bulk and weight of all that money. When I had an answer to that, the entire operation was ready. All the preparations were, of course, made only in my mind until the personality of James deGriz was again ready. The day I slipped that weighted belly back on, I felt I was back in uniform. I lit my first cigarette almost with satisfaction, then went to work. A day or two for some purchases and a few simple thefts, and I was ready. I scheduled the following afternoon for the job. A large tractor truck that I had bought was the key to the operation, along with some necessary alterations I had made to the interior. I parked the truck in an L-shaped alley about a half-mile from Moreo's. The truck almost completely blocked the alley, but that wasn't important, since it was used only in the early morning. It was a leisurely stroll back to the department store. I reached it at almost the same moment that the armored truck pulled up. I leaned against the wall of the gigantic building while the guards carried out the money. My money. To someone of little imagination, I suppose it would have been an awe-inspiring sight. At least 5 armed guards standing around the entrance, 2 more inside the truck as well as the driver and his assistant. As an added precaution, there were 3 motorcycles hurrying next to the curb. They would go with the truck as protection on the road. Oh, very impressive. I had to stifle a grin behind my cigarette when I thought about what was going to happen to those elaborate precautions. I had been counting the hand trucks of money as they rolled out of the door. There were always 15, no more, no less. This practice made it easy for me to know the exact time to begin. Just as 14 was being loaded into the armored truck, load number 15 appeared in the store entrance. The truck driver had been counting the way I had. He stepped down from the cab and moved to the door in the rear in order to lock it when loading was finished. End of Part 1.